All right, so let's just take a moment to go within, just settling into our hearts, just moving down into the deep center of our being, feeling that presence of spirit, feeling that presence of life, of love, of connection. And so we know right here in this moment that spirit is present. That spirit is present with each one of us, surrounding us and holding us and enlivening us and giving to us, each one of us, exactly what we need in our life, guiding us along our path, our journey, guiding us to this moment, this specific moment. I am knowing that it is perfect, that all of us are here. There are no mistakes, that all of us are here. We are here to receive the beautiful message that is going to come through Reverend Dan today. The music lifts us, inspires us, and opens our heart. I am knowing that all that comes through today carries us through the rest of Sunday and into the rest of our week. I am knowing that our hearts are open and full and enlivened by the presence of love, by the presence of light, by the presence of joy. So we take that sacred breath and we feel that energy washing over us, and knowing that as we come together today, that no matter where we are connected. We are connected in heart and in mind and in soul for this heart tribe that we are. We imagine sending your arms out and surrounding and holding each one. Even though we are not in the same room, I am knowing that we are connected, always connected by that presence, by that love, and by the joy of spirit. And as we come together, we recognize all those that are coming together on this day, all those who are honoring the divine in whatever ways they choose to honor it, whether it is in nature, whether it is in a temple, whether it is on a mountaintop, whatever way each individual chooses to connect in, we know that we are connected to all. We are connected to all beings across this beautiful planet and universe. And so with gratitude in our heart for this recognition and for this truth, we again breathe that in. We feel that gratitude in our heart for this time, for this moment, knowing that we are blessed, knowing that we are graced by the power and presence of God. And with that, we let this go, we allow it to be, and we simply say, and so it is.
Morning, you guys. I'm coming to you from my grandma's basement this morning in Independence, Missouri. The talk title today is Transcend and Include, so I thought I would sing one of my favorite songs that I listen to when I'm feeling nervous about something, when I'm feeling nervous about a new environment or a new situation or a new group of people that I'm not comfortable yet around. It's called Darlin' Do Not Fear, and it's by one of my favorite songwriters, Brett Dennen. Here we go. When I arrived in my own set of clothes, I was half a world away from my home, and I was hunted by the wolves, and I was heckled by the crows. Darling, do not fear what you don't really know. Alongside my innocence, I laid in bed awake, conflicted in these chains with the impetus of age. But like a phantom she crept across the floor and out the window. Darling, do not fear what you don't really know. From this place on the mantle, my heart was taken down, scattered in 1,000 little pieces on the ground, and out below the street lamp like an orphan with a halo. Darling, do not fear what you don't really know, 'cause it won't last, the worries'll pass. All your troubles, they don't stand a chance, And sometimes it takes more than a lifetime to know. But darling, do not fear what you don't really know. The confidence is full with your faith etched in stone, and I let clean comfort you from the wild unknown. So bury your burning hatred like a hatchet in the snow. Oh darling, do not fear what you don't really know. If you have a broken heart or a battered soul, find something to hold on to or to let go, to help you through the hard nights like a flask filled with hope. Oh darling, do not fear what you don't really know, 'cause it won't last. Your worries will pass. All your troubles, they don't stand a chance. And it always hurts the worst when it's the ones we love the most. But darling, do not fear what you don't really know. Sometimes your path, it's marked in the sky. Sometimes you're forced to fit in between the lines. And sometimes all that you can do is just say no. Oh darling, do not fear what you don't really know. I said when I arrived in my own set of clothes, I was half a world away from my home, and I was hunted by the wolves and I was heckled by the crows. Oh darling, do not fear what you don't really know. I said, darling, do not fear what you don't really know. We say, darling, do not fear.
Beautiful, Jimmy. Great, great song. Wow, I never heard that song before. Really, really special. So I am going to introduce Reverend Dan Granda. Reverend Dan is dedicated to a graceful uncovering of the human soul, imagining a world where it is common and lovingly accepted to bear your soul openly for others to see. Devoted to studying the evolution of human collective awareness, Reverend Dan can regularly be heard speaking to this shift happening in our world, inviting individuals to embrace the responsibility we have to each other and the community around themselves. Bringing his passion for life to all of his endeavors, Reverend Dan is driven to inspire others to find their purpose. It is his philosophy that better people make a better world. Reverend Dan is co-founder and co-director of the Soul Evolution Collaborative and outreach of the Orlando Center for Spiritual Living, dedicated to fostering both personal transformation and communal evolution through an innovative bricks and clicks model. Over the last 10 years, Reverend Dan has been active in serving the Centers for Spiritual Living on both the local and organizational levels. Reverend Dan is a graduate of the Holmes Institute and School for Spiritual Leadership and a licensed minister with the Centers for Spiritual Living. So let's harmonize our hearts and minds before I bring Reverend Dan up, as we do every Sunday, just placing your hands on your heart, taking some deep breaths, just allowing yourself to drop in, feel that presence within you, and let's repeat together. Care, appreciation, gratitude, compassion. Care, appreciation, gratitude, compassion. Care, appreciation, gratitude, compassion. All right. Well, thank you, Reverend Dan, for being here. I now turn it over to you. So glad to have you.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. It is quite a pleasure to be here. I always love the opportunity to speak in new places, especially with the ability for all of us to be anywhere and be here in the same room at the same time is really cool. So the global theme this week is transcend and include. And what a wonderful idea that sounds like. Like, doesn't that just sound really fabulous? The idea of like, oh, let's just transcend our way out of everything that's happening right now, transcend past problems and past COVID, past fighting and wars, climate disasters, just all of the stuff. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, I think at first. But then I realized that is not actually what we teach in Science of Mind. That is not actually what we practice at all. And in a lot of ways is quite the opposite of what we teach and believe and say we believe in the Science of Mind. And so I thought it would be really important to kind of get to the real core of this idea of transcend and include. Mostly, what does it actually mean to transcend? And I think this idea of transcendence, to just move past all of the things that are happening, according to Ernest Holmes, would probably be missing the point. And what he says about this, there can be no real enjoyment of life until we see that everything is animated by spirit. And as we see that things are thus animated, we are beholding the real universe. The essence of reality is invisible, but the substance of the invisible is seen and heard and is a part of everyday life. Oneness, right? I mean, Ernest Holmes, what he talks about boils down to like 10 different concepts. And we're talking about oneness, this idea that life itself, every way that life shows up, is part of oneness. The wholeness, all of it is oneness. So everything that we know is oneness. And this means not just the parts that we like, but the parts that we don't like. All of that is part of oneness. And I know that sounds simple and we can kind of say it somewhat in jest, and yet I would be lying if I didn't think I practiced oneness at times, trying to exclude the things I didn't like. And it's necessary to if we say we believe in oneness, to recognize that oneness then must include everything, because you can't have dual infinity, right? Oneness, the infinite, must then include everything that exists, because if we had oneness that excluded something, that something would imply duality. It would imply that in fact we don't have oneness, that we have two separate things. And so every moment of this perceived, this is what I like and that's what I don't, or whatever we want to include in oneness and whatever we want to exclude, right, what do I really believe? Well, I do actually believe in oneness. I do want to believe in oneness. So I think I also need to practice oneness. And so I think there is a common misunderstanding within New Thought philosophies of this idea of transcendence. What does it mean to transcend? And I think what I call New Thought light means transcendence is kind of like this poof. We've reached enlightenment and everything else fades away. And I think for that to be true, that's what would literally have to happen. We would poof, we would probably disappear. For us to transcend material experience would mean that enlightenment would have to be transcending this world. And that is very different than what Ernest Holmes was able to glean from all of these, from all of this ancient wisdom, from these religions from all over the world, that transcendence is actually not moving beyond the material world, but moving beyond our current perception. It's about transformation. So transcendence in Science of Mind is about transforming our experience, transforming our thoughts. And so while the goal of enlightenment, that version of transcendence, is to transcend the material world, the goal of transcendence within Science of Mind is to transform, to evolve and change the world we're in. So knowing that, if we look at transcend and include from the Science of Mind perspective, we actually have this brilliant perception on the world. And so I'll just share a little bit about transcend and include. This term actually comes from spiral dynamics. And if you're not familiar with spiral dynamics, I will give what I hope is the simplest definition or explanation of it that I can. So spiral dynamics is a a model of the evolutionary development of people, of organizations, of societies throughout time. It uses different levels to measure the progress of evolution of human consciousness, which develops necessarily out of the reaction to preceding levels. So essentially, and this usually happens to be generational. So one generation tends to develop new ways of doing things based on the previous generation's way of doing something. And so within this system, within spiral dynamics, there happens to be currently 2 tiers. And up until probably the 90s, there was only 1 tier. And in this first tier, every level that existed in that tier knew that they were right and that everything else was wrong. So whatever level you tended to be born into, that was the right way. And how life was taught to us, how we were essentially domesticated into the world, that perspective was right. What we grew up with was right, and everything else, then for us to be right, well, logically, everyone else needed to be wrong. And in and around the 90s, there evolved this new tier, which had somewhat, the idea of which had been around, but the critical mass to reach a whole generation of which, with the potential to reach this tier, didn't really evolve until the 90s. And so tier 2 recognizes that it's not about right or wrong, it's about what is necessary. So none of the levels within tier 1 are wrong or right, but they're all necessary to get us to where we are. And so life continues to evolve, transcend, if you will, up this spiral where we are transcending the experience of what has come before us. So when we look at transcend and include, we're literally just moving up this spiral of evolution. And transcend and include is not the idea that what came before us is wrong, so let's change it, but what came before us is so necessary for us to be here where we are. And so the idea today is really an invitation. We are invited to transcend our own beliefs, to include everything around us. So if we're talking about oneness as probably the primary principle of science of mind, we have to then include in that oneness everything that's around us. And what I think is interesting about this is, especially in science of mind, it's like, well, of course we believe in oneness. Of course. Yeah, that's our whole teaching. And yet, we each have these things in our lives that we would otherwise like to not have included in that oneness. It's really easy, and it happens all the time. And so I think that we can recognize here in this space, I'm gonna claim that this is a safe space for us to out this, to recognize this idea, to kind of call it like it is, that the world is yelling at us from pretty much every direction, that we haven't figured it out yet. And I don't mean just us, because it's easy enough for us to say, put ourselves on this righteous pedestal and say, well, we have figured it out, and it is about oneness, and we are doing these things, and we are. And the world is also yelling back at us that we are all we don't really get it yet as a collective, that we haven't really learned yet. And I think COVID is, here we go. We're going to talk about COVID again. I think COVID-19 is probably the most clear example of how this evolution works, because it showed up one way, we reacted to it. And in this reaction, there was a multitude of ways to react to it. And we looked at it, and it asked us to change so many things. And within, the world kind of locked down, and within a couple of weeks, all of this pollution started clearing up. Wildlife started showing back up in all these places where it hadn't been seen in generations. All kinds of things. There were so many cars off the road, just all kinds of reasons why, taking this time out is really helpful. And we might look back on it and say, maybe we came out of that too soon, because we came out of that and all of a sudden COVID evolved into this other thing that said, no, you don't get it yet, because you went back to the same old thing, and we have this idea that we want to go back. And yet it's still screaming, the world is still screaming, and we have, climate and COVID and war and all of these things, that the things we don't want to include in our oneness, that are saying, you're not, collectively, we're not really getting the point. And so where we are right now, we are stemming from a history of me first thinking. And the world is saying me first doesn't work anymore. And that's really what we haven't got, because even, and this is not to point out any single one of us, because we're all totally on our own path and our own place, but collectively, the collective response is, I want to do the things that I like. And so I want to go back to the way it was. I want to see this in my life. I want to fill in the blank, right? But is that what works for us? Is that we first thinking? We're being invited into this idea of we first. And tier 2 on spiral dynamics is about we, the collective. And so I hope at this point that this is not really a new idea to us, but that the implementation, the way that this actually shows up in life may be new, may be asking us to do new things. And in fact, you might even think that this doesn't apply to you. Perhaps you have always tended to be one that has cared for others, or that we have since learned about, yes, we first is really important. And kind of ironically, that's the point. That if I can put myself in a position that says, oh, well, this isn't about me because I figured this out already. Well, that right there is literally the point, that if I think I've figured it out, that I don't need to do it, that in lies, I am in me first thinking. And we first thinking says, we have not figured it out yet. So even if I have, which I don't know that I have, even if I have, we haven't yet. So to transcend and include not only requires us to stop making that around us wrong, to stop making others wrong, but to stop seeing these things that we don't like as separate from us, to stop seeing those with different opinions from us as separate from us. And that can be really hard. We literally have grown up, all of us have grown up in a way where we have been conditioned because of spiral dynamics, because of the way that life evolves. We have all grown up and lived in a world that conditioned us into me first thinking. Everything around us, the systems, the government, everything about it is based in me first thinking. So even if one of us were to move into we first, the idea of me first is still everywhere around us. And so it's going to take a whole lot more. It's going to take us to reach a critical mass of people who are moving into we first thinking in order to change. And I personally believe that the last year and a half has been this thrusting forward of us and our collective consciousness into this idea of we first. How much longer would it have taken to get that many people into thinking about how much more important the collective is than the individual? I think I'm just going to go out there on a limb and say that everybody at some point in the last year and a half has had some sort of realization about how much more we impact each other's lives than we previously had thought. Ernest Holmes says, "There is then no limitation outside our own ignorance. And since we can all conceive of a greater good than we have so far experienced, we all have the ability to transcend previous experiences and rise triumphant above them. But we shall never triumph over them while we persist in going through the old mental reactions. That is super important. And I think that is the key takeaway. If we take away anything from our current collective experience, it is that as long as we keep replaying old reactions, our old thinking systems, we end up with the same exact outcome. And yet the world is evolving. So the world around us continues to evolve. And so if I keep playing out my same old systematic thinking processes, I'm going to be met with this great resistance to my thinking, this great, perhaps painful experience when I think, no, we need to stay this way, and the world continues moving. The world is moving on. And so the takeaway from this is, I hope, is that in transcending and including, that we recognize the world that we were born into. We recognize how the world had evolved up until the point that we were born into it and continued evolving. And so we were previously in this world of right and wrong. And so many of us have taken that idea of right or wrong and continued with it because we are continuously rewiring this old way of thinking instead of recognizing the world as fluid and on a spectrum and moving and continuously evolving. And so if everyone is wrong, there is no transcending the experience. If I have old ways of thinking which are based in right or wrong, there is no transcending, there is no including. So our job is really to turn every wrong into necessary. So to embrace that it's not about right or wrong. It doesn't mean I have to recognize being wrong for someone else to be right. We can all be right. And it means it is requiring us to step into a higher level of thinking on this spiral, to embrace this idea that it's not right or wrong, it is what's necessary. And so I think we can recognize how probably 20 years in the future, looking back on the last couple of years, we will see this as a giant push forward in our evolution, in our way of thinking. And this doesn't mean that we become a doormat either. To recognize that everything is necessary doesn't mean that we become the spiritual doormat of everyone else who may still be in right or wrong thinking. It doesn't mean things are acceptable. It just means they're necessary. And so to step into necessary and not feel the need then to get into a debate about one side of an issue or another, but just recognize that that issue and how it comes up is necessary, moves all of us forward. And it is necessary that out of the craziness that comes out, that we just recognize the things that seem crazy because we are looking at them as right or wrong. And so that which seems crazy to you right now is actually crazy because of the amount of unhealed mess that has gone on in our world for generations. It is the unhealed mess that exists in our subconscious. So it seems crazy because it seems so opposing to forward movement, and yet it exists. I know it exists because it's here. It's showing up in front of us. Life is our mirror. And so it exists in our subconscious mind. We need to know about it so that we can heal it. If it doesn't show up, we can't change it. We can't change what's in our subconscious mind that we don't know about. And so the things that have shown up that seem to be so wrong and so bad are super necessary to come out in the world so that we can change it. And it's not about right or wrong, but it does mean necessary. It is necessary for the craziness to be this crazy right now, because that is the level it had to get to in order for enough people to have to put enough attention on it to actually make a change big enough to reach this idea of critical mass to the point where the collective shifts into a new belief, a new way of being, that we actually had to get to this level of mess in front of us to see it, kind of like outing all of those beliefs, like, oh yeah, we forgot we believed in that. Huh. Okay, let's fix that one. Oh yeah, that one too, right? All of these things, we're moving in this forward direction, and we got thrust so quickly that all of these things that were unlike it had to come to the surface for us to say, ah, yes. But if we are viewing them from right or wrong, we miss the point. So to step into necessary, to transcend and include these ideas as necessary for our evolution becomes key. So every time that something shows up in your life that seems like you totally had enough, we are being asked in that moment to transcend and include that idea, to make it necessary, not right or wrong, but necessary, that we transcend our own belief that that thing is wrong and recognize how necessary it is for me first to evolve into a real sense of we first. We have to recognize and heal that thing. And we then have we first when we see things as necessary instead of wrong. So join me, if you will, in a commitment to seeing the wholeness of life, everything that shows up in front of us, the allness that makes up our belief in oneness, right? Everything that shows up in front of us must be part of allness, must be part of wholeness that makes up oneness. And join me in seeing all of this out in front of us as necessary. That know that you have the ability to make small shifts in your thinking systems. I like thinking systems because it's a bigger idea than just a single thought. Yes, we make shifts by changing a single thought, but it's that whole system of thinking and beliefs and values and emotions and feelings behind that, our thinking systems, that actually have a huge impact on our collective consciousness. That every time we embrace some sort of new way of being, new way of thinking, we literally make a change in collective subconscious. And recognize that you are uniquely leveraged within this teaching for global change by recognizing that when we individually all begin to transcend and include, then we collectively continue making huge shifts in our collective consciousness. Okay, so if that wasn't enough, the craziest part about all of this is really that you don't actually have a choice about this. This is already happening. It's been happening. Now, of course, we have a choice whether we're going to go along with it or not, but evolution itself is continuous. Evolution is creation, is change. So the mess that is showing up in the world in front of us is, in fact, the continued evolution of our collective consciousness, reacting to everything that has come before it. It is the necessary reaction and change and forward movement of life. We are just witnessing the chemicalization of change in real time, right? We didn't invent this spiral. It wasn't like this evolution exists because we created spiral dynamics somewhere along the way. But the spiral exists. We're just measuring it. We didn't invent the spiral. We are on it. So we really have two choices in this realization of this spiral of our evolution. And one is we can resist it. We can resist the evolution, continue in right or wrong perception, and probably create a really painful experience, especially at this point in time, that to dig into this right or wrong thinking is, it just brings up this image of just getting like steamrolled, like evolution is just steamrolling over, like we waited long enough, we're going. The second choice is we get to take part in evolution of our collective. We get to be active, create a world that flourishes in our divine freedom simply by recognizing that choice. And so to transcend and include recognizes that we must transcend our own beliefs to include everything that is around us, to embrace we first thinking in order to witness life unfolding perfectly in front of us for our collective good. So I don't know about you, I think we need to move into a little bit of prayer here, because this is a big topic, important topic, but there is some heaviness to it that I do recognize. So let us move into this idea, this knowingness that there is one singular presence that is everywhere, that has created everything out of itself. It is the epitome of oneness, because it is literally all that there is. And it is this allness that we see, we recognize as wholeness, and we recognize it as the creator, but also as the creation. And so as the creation and the creator, this transcendent and immanent being, we are that which it is. We show up here as the creation, but also recognizing that the creator moves in and through us, that we are in fact what it is. And there's so much less separation between our perception of us and it than we could ever possibly imagine. In fact, there is no separation between us and it. Not that it is actually an it and we are actually us, but that there is this divine connection as we show up as this thing. We are the form of this formless mind. And so I recognize that in this very moment, there is a healing taking place just by the very nature of recognizing the divine connection between life and the way life came to be. There is a healing in this recognition in the subconscious of any sort of separation, any sort of waiting for something to happen, waiting for something else to do something. And we recognize that it is through us that life continues to happen. And so we recognize the choice that we have in this life, that we take part in the creation, we take part in the forward movement, we take part in this way of being. And we have the choice to create in a way that works for the collective. And so we recognize this way deeper connection of each one of us, the all of us, the we first thinking, the collective we. We recognize the connection between all of us, that it is no longer I create this world that works for me and want it to work for everyone else, but we are collecting a world that works for all of us. We are creating this world that demonstrates and mirrors in front of us in a way that is in line with this forward movement evolution, this collective consciousness, this collective awareness, that we become more and more aware of the consciousness that already exists. And so I simply recognize the gratitude for healing whatever needs to be healed in this on the collective plane, recognizing the gratitude that shows up from knowing that nothing that is happening in front of us is wrong. I recognize the gratitude for cultivating the willingness to take part in this forward movement thinking, the willingness that recognizes we are all way more in this together than we have ever realized. And so with this gratitude, I simply release this word and let it go, knowing that everything that needs to be healed is healed, and everything that needs to be done is already, in fact, done and complete in the mind of the consciousness, and plays out in front of us as necessary. And so it is.